Welcome to Shared Insights, the podcast from BA Insight. My name is Pete Wright, and I'm joined today by BA Insight's Chief Customer Officer, Sean Coleman. Welcome back, Sean.
Glad to be here, Pete.
You are here to share the story of another of our global pharmaceutical partners and their quest to build a next-generation search platform. Now, we have covered some of the unique complexities that face the life sciences with Jeff in recent conversations, from mergers and acquisitions to integration challenges and regulatory requirements on data. This takes us into this next conversation, determining the requirements, the driving factors, the technical, cultural, and political factors that drive toward a decision on next-gen search. To get us started, can you talk about some of the more specific background challenges that were driving this organization when you came on the scene?
Yeah, I think specifically in life sciences, I think there's some real kind of core differences or challenges that they face. And when you think about a search platform, I think most companies would think, I put it up, people search, they find what they're looking for. When you look at life sciences specifically, and you think about all the different types of people that are at the organization, from researchers to marketers to potentially support people to any of the things that go there, the information that they're after, that they need is slightly different based on who they are. So when you look at search, just kind of core general purpose search doesn't work very good for them because it really has to do with who you are, what products you work with, what region you're in, what department you're in, potentially even what group you're associated to that day. And then kind of layer over that, especially what this client was dealing with was, from a globalization perspective, they had all of these individuals, but then they had rules and things that applied to their EMEA group that didn't apply to their US group. And all of this needed to kind of almost be fed in like an instruction set to ultimately what they wanted out of search. So they started with I'll say at a very lofty goal, right? One where it's like, hey, we want a search platform that understands our people, understands our business, and applies that into the searching so that the information that they find is tailored specifically to who they are. And we don't want 1,000 people on the back end of this having to tag these things and do a whole bunch of work.
I was just going to say, that seems like we're going to just hire 500 monkeys that can sit and interpret search terms without ever anybody knowing that that's going on in the background.
Right.
We need human interpretation to sit there and interpret our search requirements.
Yeah, you would think, but the technology is such that you don't need that. And that's definitely what they were looking to do.
You talk about kind of the search landscape. What are the technologies that were under consideration at the time that actually met all those requirements? It
was definitely a combination of existing, technology that they had, other things that they were doing, lots of different back-end technology, but they always knew that they needed some kind of specialized technology to help that. So if you look at any search platform, your basics are your index into itself, what's going to store all of the data, right? You've got what they refer to as the semantic layer or the classification layer, taxonomy and ontology, right? What's good for managing those, and then how do you take that taxonomy and ontology and apply it to the content that's going into the index? At the top level, how do you deliver an interface that has the tools and techniques that people want? I think this company specifically really struggled with what the right search engine for them was. And what we tried to show them through the process was that the search engines have kind of some, I'll call them, minor to mid-level differences, right? SharePoint search does it this way, Elasticsearch does it that way. And one of the things that early on, there was a lot of conversation around that. What we tried to do was elevate it to the level of, you can actually have both of those. But what's more important is, what is your interface doing to your users? How is it providing the information to them? And then how is all of your taxonomy and ontology and metadata getting applied? Because those two things are independent sometimes of that search index. So those are the kind of what they considered. Right. But I think that, a lesson learned or maybe even a benefit for other people is, don't really get caught up too long on, am I going to use SharePoint search? Am I going to use Elasticsearch? There's capabilities to actually allow you to use both of those or even switch easily between them. And BA Insight's done a lot of work in that area. But to focus more on the rich metadata and the rich user experience that you ultimately want to get, what's going to get you fastest way there. And ultimately, the SharePoint platform was one that they went with to do that. They ultimately made that decision to go that way, and I think it going to be paying off for them when they complete their implementation.
Well, I want to get into a little bit of that implementation, particularly around proof of concept and testing these things out. But I wonder if you could step back and just talk a little bit about any of these driving factors that may have surprised you. I mean, we've talked about the complexities of the expectations of the various groups that all come to search with different needs, but there is this other layer, right? The cultural or political layer that was there anything involved in what they needed search to do that actually came as a surprise to you?
Yeah, I think the level of personalization that they wanted to do. I mean, a lot of times what we found was that in the past, they almost had these small purpose-built search applications for individual groups. They had one that served medical literature up to this group. They had an EMEA-specific search engine for this group, and those were kind of custom built, I would say, almost like hand tools, like hand chiseled to do exactly what they wanted to do. And one of their goals was, we don't want 15 different places to search. We want one, but that one needs to work for that person the same way as the old one did. We can't take anything away from them. So that was like, okay, well, we've got all these individual requirements, and now we need to bring them together and solve all of them in one system, which is a challenge, right? So which requirement is more important than the other. And in talking to them, you realize that that's not really the way to look at it. They're all important. How do we get a system that's flexible enough to allow us to do those individual things? The other thing that was really, really great about this company is they had a very passionate group core team that was very much into the ins and outs of metadata and taxonomy and ontology and classification, search, and just their concepts of the things that they want, to the level where a lot of times systems come with quote unquote proprietary algorithms, right? So a search system can say, well, you run a search and we give you back the results based on our kind of proprietary algorithm. And that's not really going to cut it with this group, because they really want to know, if this thing comes up second and this came up fourth, what's deciding between those two, and what's our ability to really manage that relevancy return to the point, depending on who you are, to get in there. And, we don't want any quote unquote black box or things that we don't understand. So that was a requirement that I think was very special, and exciting to see, right? We build search applications. A lot of times people just, it's great. They need it. They love it. But they don't want to know the ins and outs. They don't want to kind of talk techie with us. But this group, having this group that really wanted to know how it worked, and then wanted to say, how can we take that model and apply it to all these different people and different ways to use it. It was really exciting, and they were good challenges to have, and definitely fun to work with them on.
That's fantastic. I mean, you hear so often, just tune the results, and
right.
and nobody, like the business leaders, don't always know what tune means in this context. But in this case, it sounds like
they say make it better, right? So
yeah,
well, it's not good, make it better. I'm like, okay, well, what's not good about it? Well, it's just not that good. No, these. Yeah. They got real, very specific feedback of, this is what I expect to come up before that. This is why I expected to come up before that. Here are the factors on why sometimes it maybe shouldn't come up ahead of this other one, which was all very unique to get to know their business and get to know how they looked at things, and how, relevancy was very personal, by the groups they were. It was very exciting.
So let's talk a little bit about this proof of concept phase. How did they approach selection in this case? Did they test and proof of concept multiple platforms in some capacity? How did that work?
Yeah, they did. I mean, I think they wanted to. Certainly, proof of concept was big for them in making their decision. They needed to see it. They needed to get their hands on it. I think that this was very smart. What they did was, we talked earlier about all the different little mini systems that they had that people were using, and they went to those business owners or the people they knew, and they said, kind of what are your core complaints, or what are your core issues, or what things can't you get? And they came up with a list of these like 17 or 18 core use cases that were, a new system needs to be able to do this, and a new system needs to be able to do that. And it was all solving problems that they had in their existing environment. And for their proof of concept, that's what they based it on. They said, we want to see different technology, how it would accomplish solving these 17 or 18 things. And they looked at both SharePoint and Elasticsearch's backends and a couple of different interface components. And then through a pretty rapid paced process, got to the point where they had a demoable environment that they could actually show their business users, look, here's the problem that you brought us. Here's how that's solved in our proof of concept. And it went over great, right? The business users loved it. And to the point where they realized at that point that on either side of the technology, they were able to solve those problems from a SharePoint or an Elastic or things like this. And they had a good SharePoint infrastructure team. They had a good knowledge in that area. And so that, I think that's ultimately one of the things that led them down that path is, if we can solve our problems, let's go with a known factor, something that we've worked with internally and something that we know from a platform perspective is pretty solid. We don't need to go out and get all new technology to solve this problem. We just needed help in some of these areas to do it, and they did some really cool stuff.
So they already had SharePoint up and running. They did not have an Elasticsearch implementation. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They had SharePoint was being used for a couple of the other search applications that they had. A lot of content. They're big in SharePoint Online, so they're actually their trajectory for their IT infrastructure is to go with cloud or SaaS vendors for as much as they possibly can. So they're, from a hosting perspective, they're looking at things like Amazon Web Services, SharePoint Online, and Office 365, and knowing that that's a strategic direction for their company, aligning the technology platform of this search to ultimately go that way too was something that was important to them and part of their proof of concept discussions. Show us how this can ultimately work in the cloud and work in an environment like Amazon Web Services or other things like that.
For anyone who has been involved in these kinds of decisions, I have to imagine there was a hallelujah moment when they realized, oh my goodness, we can use what we already have and not invest in all new stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Well, this is only part one of this story. Where do we go from here? I know in our next conversation, you're going to give us a little bit more detail around the implementation. Can you tease that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think ultimately when they got to the point of proof of concept and they realized that with a combination of solid search infrastructure like SharePoint, mix of some of the technologies that we brought to the table. So in the next one, we'll talk a little bit in more detail about how, some of our tools, we have a tool that allows, kind of dynamic relevancy modifications. We have some really cool stuff we did with classification in identifying, not just what a document is about, but what it's primarily about, and boosting things that if you're searching for diabetes, you're not going to get a lot of results that just mention diabetes. You're going to get papers and things specifically on diabetes, and then a whole user profile section that allowed a user to come in and say, I'm interested in these type of documents, I work in this region, I'm this type of worker, and how all of the configuration of the system leveraged those preferences that a person set up and kind of reconfigured itself on the fly to speak directly to that user. So that's some of the really cool stuff that we did with them in implementation, and with a combination of our products and the SharePoint platform, that I think they're very, very excited about where it's going.
That's fantastic. I look forward to hearing more about that and sharing it with all of you listeners. Thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this show. If you are listening on our new Life Sciences page, make sure you subscribe to the show. You'll hear all sorts of great stories about this topic and so much more. And thank you, Sean Coleman, Chief Customer Officer, BA Insight, for your time and attention today. We sure appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to do it. Thank you, Pete.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. On behalf of Sean Coleman, I'm Pete Wright. We'll catch you next time right here on Shared Insights, the podcast from BA Insight.